Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, the weather is heating up, and so is America. Protests are happening across campuses. The NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs are here, and we are deep into the most important part of the political season. And we're continuing our series on Meet the Independent Candidates 2024 with the independent candidate for Senate from the great state of Nebraska, the great and powerful Dan Osborn is with us on Independent Americans. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for that intro. I've never been called that before.
Well, I hope it's the first of many because you're an inspiring guy, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. We've never met in person, but it's great to finally meet you virtually here. I know you were in New York last week, and I missed you. But I want to start, your whole campaign is unconventional in a lot of powerful ways and a lot of challenging ways. Can you tell folks where you came from, like just now, right? Like you had to take off of work to have this conversation, and I think that might be a good setup for the whole thing. Can you explain where you were before you were here?
Yeah, I drove here, actually not too far from where I'm at now. I was at Boys Town working on rebuilding a chilled water pump, and well, I didn't even wash my hands. So I just took off and drove over here for this. And hopefully I don't get in too much trouble when I get back.
Well, if you're getting in trouble, they're doing something wrong because you're really advocating for a lot of folks in that community and I think nationally, and your campaign's caught a lot of attention. But let's just start, Dan, with who you are, where you are. Give folks a little bit of background if they're just meeting you for the first time. Who are you? Where are you? And why are you doing this big thing of running for U.S. Senate?
Yeah, well, I'm in Omaha. I moved to Omaha when I was 7. My dad worked for Union Pacific. That's how I ended up here. So all I remember really. But I went to high school, grade school, high school here. I graduated high school and I went immediately into the Navy. My grandfather retired from the Navy. My father was in the Navy. My mother was in the Navy. My uncles were all in the Navy, and my brother he joined the Marine Corps. So we don't talk to him anymore. But I don't hold it against him. But yeah, I joined the Navy. I was aboard the USS Constellation aircraft carrier, CV-64, the Connie for those that were served in the Navy. It's scrap metal nowadays, but I did 2 Westpaks aboard that ship, and I got an honorable discharge. I came back to Omaha, and went to University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I joined the Nebraska Army National Guard. I went to 19 Kilo School in Boise, Idaho. So on the M1A1 Abrams tank crew during that time. And my wife became pregnant with our first daughter. Her name is Georgia. She is now 21 years old, and she's a professional dancer in Hollywood. So it's a very exciting stuff. Although, I use professional loosely. She gets paid for her gigs, but I still have to flip the bill for a lot of things out there. But it's okay. She's living her best life. But when she was born, I knew I had to go get a job. So I got a job working at Kellogg's as an industrial mechanic. Uh, I worked there for 20 years. My first day on the job, I don't know if you remember who Tom Selleck is, but uh, old mechanic came up to me. He's like, "Kid, you join the union yet?" I'm like, "No, sir, I have not." He's like, "Well, you need to go join the union." I'm like, "Okay." I didn't know what unions really even were back then, but I joined the union and I kept my head down and I worked hard for a lot of years and we got good contracts. And then the old guys started to retire. I kind of started to become the old guy, and our contracts started to we started to lose things. Kellogg's became more of a corporate entity than a family run company and beholden to their stockholders, whatnot. So I decided it was time for me to get involved. I ran for executive board. I got elected vice president. It was a whole new changing of the guard for the e-board, but the president stepped down after about 3 months. You get yelled at a lot in that job by both members and management. So uh, yeah, although I don't like getting yelled at, I knew it was an important role, so I stepped into it. And then I was doing that for about a year. Then COVID hit. We were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day during COVID as essential workers. At one time, 50% of our workforce was forced quarantined and or sick. But we kept 4 North American plants running Uh, Throughout that time, I was going to use a phrase that I probably shouldn't use, but we kept the plants running, and our contract expired at the end of that year in October. But Kellogg's made record profits during COVID. Then in 2020, they went from $19 billion to $21 billion. And that year, the CEO gave himself a $2 million raise. The board enriched themselves. The stockholders enriched themselves. So we figured this was going to be an easy contract for us. But the first day of negotiations, they sat across the table from us. They said, "We're going to take your health insurance. We're going to take your cost of living adjustments, which was our only form of wage adjustment or wage increases, and we're going to implement a permanent style two-tier wage system, which ultimately means there's going to be, the two tiers of workers. The lower tier usually graduates to the upper tier. There would be no way for the lower tier to get into the upper tier. Essentially, everybody would be on the lower tier."
Mhm.
For me, that was my old crap moment, and I had to figure out what going on strike means, how to pick it, why you pick it, calling police and fire, and just trying to get as much information as I could. Created a picket schedule for 500 of my members in Omaha. On October 5th, midnight rolled around. We did not come to an agreement with the company. They had no intention of giving us an agreement. But so we shut down 4 North American plants around the country, and we walked off the job for wages and benefits. Uh,
And so that
Paul,
kind of
it was,
launched you into the leadership and advocacy and national recognition on some levels, right? And
yeah,
kind of stepping out and into the public eye. How do you go from there, Dan, to deciding you want to run for U.S. Senate?
yeah. So without wasting too much time on the strike, we were on strike for 77 days, and we won a pretty decent contract. But I remember walking back into that manufacturing plant and just feeling an enormous sense of pride for what we were able to accomplish for working people. 1,500, we saved 1,500 good paying jobs around the country, 500 of them in Omaha, and that definitely played into wanting to run for United States Senate. I want to do it on a bigger scale. That feeling that I had, that pride I had for doing something for working people, I want to do that for the people in Nebraska.
Mm. So you've decided to do it as an independent, which you've been a hardworking guy your whole life. So you're taking the hardest path possible, which is running as an independent. You in the past, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were a Democrat maybe till 2016 or so. Why are you
Hmm.
running as an independent? And how do you define independent? We've talked to a lot of folks with different perspectives, and you are now defining independent for many people in this high profile national race. So why are you an independent, and how do you define independent?
Well, yeah, you mentioned 2016. I registered as an independent. And I felt disenfranchised by both parties. It was the uh, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump debates. And I just felt like that the two parties were starting to cater to their extremes even back then, more so now. Politics is so polarizing. And I just never felt like I matched an entire party line, right? So it just wasn't for me. So I'm an independent, and what an independent means to me is basically like Nebraska. We got a nonpartisan unicameral here. It's the only one in the country. Uh, there's no R's or D's next to names. When you go to vote, we have open primaries where independent people can vote. But I like to think that I take the best of both sides and try to combine it into one, if you will. But the coolest thing about running as an independent has been I'm not beholden to a party line. I don't have anybody tell me the way I'm supposed to think about an issue. So whether it's ag, nursing, education, we go out and we find people in that field. If it's education, we find special ed teachers, elementary teachers, rural teachers, university professors, and then we draft our policy based on what those people want and need, not what somebody's telling me.
I want to talk about some of the positions you're focused on, and I want to talk about your opponent. But this is a question I've been asking everybody as well. So let's assume you break the odds and you win and you're elected to the U.S. Senate. Who will you caucus with? Will you caucus with the Democrats, the Republicans, or neither?
I've never been asked that before. Thank you for asking me. But George Norris is the one who created the unicameral here in Nebraska. He was the last independent senator. His last term, he didn't caucus with either party. I don't plan on caucusing with either party. I want to create an independent caucus, maybe even a Nebraska caucus. Who knows? Because here's the thing: if I tell you, Paul, that I'm going to caucus with the Republicans, what does that make me? It makes me a Republican. So why wouldn't I be running with as a Republican either way? So I want to be a true independent, try to be a maverick in this, and just really change the status quo and change American politics as we know it. I know it kind of sounds crazy to say that out loud, but that's the way I feel.
No, I frankly think that that's the answer that most true independents want to hear. It's what Evan McMullin said when he ran for Senate in Utah and put up a pretty competitive race. I mean, those of us who know politics know the challenge is you don't get leadership positions, right? Like that's how Bernie Sanders ends up caucusing with the Democrats. And even though he's, one of the farthest left folks and never served in the military, he becomes the chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. So I think that we obviously recognize that there's a challenge built into that, but I think that does help people clearly understand where you stand. Let's take it one step further. It's a presidential election that's dominating the national news. So-called independent candidates that I've criticized, including, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, Jill Stein are out there. Will you endorse anyone for president? Will you endorse one of them, Biden, Trump, or no one?
I'll tell you one good thing about each president. Biden's been, probably one of the most friendly pro-labor presidents of that I remember. And my 401k never did better under Trump. But with that being said, I go out and I talk to a lot of people in Nebraska, and the consensus is most people are frustrated with their choices. I fall into that consensus as well. So I might just go ahead and write in my dad. He was a Dodge County commissioner there in Fremont, Nebraska. So I'm gonna write him in.
I appreciate the creativity of that, but is that also what you'd recommend your supporters do? Because if you're not voting for one of them in a place like Nebraska that tends to be red, right, that's gonna obviously kind of get lost, right? Like a write-in candidate, your dad might get some votes and other folks might get some votes, but is that what you'd advise other, especially young independents, to do as well?
Well, I would tell those people to just vote their conscience. Vote on who you think's going to do the best job for you. Like I had a guy come and I was sitting at lunch one day and he slaps his union card down in front of me. He's like, "You can take this and you can shove it. I don't want it anymore." And I go, "Okay." And he's sit down. What? Tell me what's going on. And he just received a mailer in the mail that our union was telling him to vote for Joe Biden, and he's like, "I'm not voting for Biden." And I go, "Okay, well, first of all, take this card back and put it back in your wallet, because what this card represents is your health insurance and your wages and the rest of your benefits. So you're going to need that. So put it back in your wallet." And but this card doesn't represent a president or who you're supposed to vote for. So I understand that international unions obviously would like to see Joe Biden reelected, but rank and file members or just anybody independents and just say, hey, just vote for who you believe is going to do the best for you.
I want to pull that apart because I think it's a fascinating part about your campaign. A lot of folks, for example, assume veterans have been overwhelming Republican, and they have voted that way a lot. And people assume that union folks are going to vote Democrat because that's been the case in the past. I come from a union family. My father used to work in the GM plant when he was young, and then he was in the union at Con Edison, and then went through to management. My brother is still in the union now. He's in the local one too. I've been around a family when they're on strike, when my dad was in management and had to cover on the strike, when my brother goes out on strike. So I've been around that. But I think you're tapping into something. I guess what I want to ask you is, the Democrats seem to have taken union votes for granted. But I know you look at the police union here in New York or the firefighters union, they tend to go to the right. Do you think that union votes are up for grabs here and can be a real stronghold for independence as we build this movement?
I don't think it's really changed. I think the rank and file members represent the rest of the state very similar too. Um, as you move up into leadership roles, you probably see a little bit more Democrats than you do Republicans because they work in that field. But yeah, ultimately, I think they just represent the rest of their state.
Yeah, I think it's exciting because I think union folks are not a monolith any more than veterans or the active duty military or anyone else. But I think that the political parties would like you to think they are, right. I think it's much more complicated than that, and it's a part of your race that's going to be particularly interesting. But it may also, your pro union positions may get you support from the Democratic Party, which is something that you're going to need if you're going to win. I mean, you're up against Deb Fisher. She's an incumbent. She's a Republican. You've called her, do nothing, Deb Fisher. Can you talk about your opponent and your strategy to win? You're going to have to be creative here. I know that you have outraised her recently, but she's got something like $4 million in the bank. I mean, you're David here against the machine and Goliath. So talk about your opponent and how you are going to plan to beat her.
I think my opponent is she's just a part of the cog in the corrupt machine of DC. The United States Senate is full of millionaires and billionaires, business execs, and lawyers. Like there's nobody like me in the United States Senate. And actually all of Congress, only 2% of elected officials are working class people. Um, so that's, I believe, where the corruption comes from. She takes money from class one railroads, big pharma. She votes against the Rail Safety Act. We've had three derailments here in the last 3 weeks. One was this close to an anhydrous plant, could have leveled the whole town of Chapel, Nebraska. I talked to the railroaders out there. That locomotive was flagged for repairs. If the Railroad Safety Act was enacted, then that would have uh, that would have been prevented. So it's frustrating to sit back and watch that continuously happen with our elected officials. I tell everybody this because this statistic still, every time I say it, it blows my mind that $50 trillion since 1980 has moved from the bottom 90% of Americans to the top 1% of Americans. It's the biggest migration of wealth in human history. And that begs the question, how has that happened under our watch, under our noses? Well, it's because our elected officials are on the take, and they create legislation that benefits multinationalistic, monopolistic corporations, which is the 1%, and this is what we're left with.
So how are you going to beat her? I mean, I think she can easily try to label you as a Democrat wearing an independent name. She's going to say the union's behind you. What you didn't mention there that I've heard you say is you're also in favor of tax cuts, right? And things like that. But is there any part of your position, especially on, let's use the union and the reform parts, that's not traditional Democrat? Is there
Sure.
any way where you're breaking with the Democratic Party? And I'll also
Yeah.
come back to it. How are you going to beat her? I mean, yeah, she is all those things, but you got the chip stacked against you here.
Well, it's probably noteworthy to mention at this point, there's been two polls, one by Change Research and one by PPP, and both polls have me neck and neck with Deb Fisher. And the last poll, we didn't force undecideds to answer questions, but it was 30% of them are undecided at that moment. So there's 300,000 registered nonpartisan voters in Nebraska. That's a pretty big number. It's the fastest growing demographic of registering voters, and I think that just goes to show that is everybody wants to say Nebraska's so red, but I think we're more independent than we are red. For sure, we have an independent spirit, always have. Uh, we've raised, we're encroaching on our first $1 million. Most of that, I think it's an average of $37 per donation. And Deb Fisher takes money from mostly a corporate PAC. So, this campaign is resonating with people. People are ready for a change. It's also interesting that on the first poll, a lot of respondents didn't even know who I was. Well, I got the name. It's pretty synonymous with Nebraska, with the most winningest football coach in
Yeah, I
Nebraska
was going to
history.
ask you that. I mean, you've got an advantage here that's baked in. I don't know how you calculate it, but there are probably plenty of people
Yeah,
who think you might be Tom Osborn, the former Nebraska coach, which would help you for sure.
yeah, yeah. It doesn't hurt, but I think what that poll really says is people are just ready for a change. They said they'd vote for me versus Fisher and didn't even know who I was.
Hmm.
I think it's inflation. It's hurting people. It's hurting me as a working class person. Your dollar doesn't stretch near as far at the pump in the grocery store as it did even 5 years ago. So when people are hurting, they tend to pay more attention. But I think the thing that separates me from Deb Fisher, three things: um, curbing inflation. She was censured by three Republican parties for fiscal irresponsibility. So that's there's 34 trillion reasons why there. I think we differ on the border. Well, I differ on the border and Second Amendment from Democrats. I think without a border, we don't have a country. Deb Fisher's had 12 years to close the borders. She's done nothing. She voted against the border bill, which Republicans drafted, and Democrats were ready to sign on to, and she votes against it. So I don't think she wants the border closed because she takes money from big ag corporations, and big ag benefits from constant labor source, undocumented labor source coming up here, and they can take advantage of that. So that's frustrating to me. But
And
yeah,
on the
that's
Second Amendment, can you talk about your position on that and how it's different from, a traditional Democrat or someone else?
yeah. And I talk about the Second Amendment. I branch out into rural areas all the time, and I live in the city. So, being out in central Nebraska is just different than it is being in an urban area. And I think our laws could reflect that. I tell people when I go to GOP county meetings, I've been to three of them. I have seven more on my schedule because I'll talk to anyone. But I'm like, just have all the guns you want. It doesn't matter. But if you live in a city of close to 1 million people, I like to default to what the police officers want because those are the folks and the first responders. Those are the people who have to deal and see the gun violence every single day. So I don't know exactly how that looks, but that's the idea that's rolling around in my head.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful differentiator. I mean, you have an ability to offer common sense solutions, and your background is unique. And one of my favorite senators, even though he's a Democrat, is John Tester, who's a pretty independent-minded guy from Montana, who talks a lot about his experience on a farm, right, and how he can represent farmers and he understands ag. I think you have the same kind of potential to represent workers. You also used to have a senator in that state that was a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient and a Navy SEAL, my friend Bob Kerrey, who ran for president, represented the Senate well. I'm curious if you've sought his endorsement. And, building off of that, he was obviously a leader in foreign policy. Deb Fisher is going to say, you don't have any experience in foreign policy. Can you talk about, your views on foreign policy and if you're able, Ukraine, Gaza are happening right now. Why is Dan Osborn qualified to lead America on those critical foreign policy and national security issues?
Yeah. So to touch on Bob Kerrey, we have gotten his endorsement. I sought that early on because, like you, I respect the crap out of Bob and for what he's done for Nebraska and the country. Um, But there's three qualifications that the founding fathers set up to run for United States Senate. You got to be at least 30 years old, so I'm overqualified there. You gotta live in the state you're running in. You got to be an American citizen. So that's how they set it up. That's certainly not the way it's run nowadays. It seems pretty much anymore. You have to have an Ivy League degree, $4 million in the bank. But you know as far as foreign policy goes, I'll touch on Ukraine first, and the Russian aggression. Ukraine and Israel or the Gaza in particular have commonalities in the fact that a lot of innocent people are getting killed. We're seeing the bombing of schools and hospitals, people starving in the streets. It's an atrocity. It's hard to watch. And as somebody who's seen the cost of war firsthand, I didn't do any combat myself, but I've served with people that have, and like yourself. And thank you for your service. But I've seen how it can affect people, and it's hard. It's hard. It's a difficult thing to see, and difficult things that you'll never unsee. But I was talking to a guy who put it to me the best, in the fact that, the other side of not supporting Ukraine is America first, right? We have enough problems here at home that we shouldn't be the world's police, and that's the argument. But he put it as, and I've adopted this as well because I believe it. Supporting Ukraine is America first. Like I got an 18-year-old son who plays the viola and guitar and the piano. He's an amazing human being, such a gifted artist. To the thought of him getting drafted into the military is extremely difficult for me. And we're fighting a proxy war in Ukraine. Like, we don't have any boots on the ground. But if this war, and nobody has a crystal ball, right? But if this war spills into Europe, then man, it's we have to stop Russia before that happens, and we should be supporting the Ukrainian people because they didn't ask for this. Uh, so that's my take on Ukraine and with
So
Israel and
that's important,
Gaza.
Dan. If I can pause you. So if you were in the Senate, last week, you would have voted to support the Ukraine funding bill. And,
Yes.
and okay, now comes the harder one, right? I mean, now we've got Gaza and Israel. What's your position there? I mean, right now there's a lot of folks saying we should pull funding from Israel. Folks are calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. What's your position there right now?
Yeah, I think is Israel had an attack on October 7th that, I've seen the video footage. It's atrocious what happened to them. And they certainly have the right to defend themselves, just like we did after 9/11. But what I'm seeing now in Gaza is, at what point can you claim victory? At what point did you reach your retribution, if you will? I think the last statistic, and it is a statistic, right? But 13,000 children killed. That's difficult. So I would support a ceasefire, and the United States is positioned uniquely to be able to broker a peace deal along with Egypt and Qatar. Uh, and as far as supplying Israel, it has to be, in my opinion, it has to be defense weapons only, not weapons you drop from the sky.
Got it. Thank you for taking us through that. I got two final questions that are a whole lot easier here. Number one, I'm rooting for you. You've got my endorsement. A lot of folks are pulling for you. But your chances are you're not going to win this. Maybe you will. I'm rooting for you to pull it out, just like I'm rooting for my Knicks and I'm rooting for the Rangers, right? I'm got those are my areas of focus right now. But if you don't, what are you going to do? Because now you're a movement leader. Are you going to go back to working in the factory? Are you going to stay involved as an advocate? You're a powerful voice. If you don't win this one, what's plan B?
Well, I try not to think about that too much, Paul. Thanks for bringing that back into the forefront of my mind. But I'm not going to go back to work in a factory because I got fired from Kellogg's after not too long after the strike. So, but I'm a steam fitter now. But I don't know. I guess the question is I don't know. I guess I'll just go back to work and continue flying by the seat of my pants and see where it takes me.
I appreciate the candor and as I'm sure you're an awesome steam fitter. I think we need you out here raising your voice and advocating for folks who don't have a voice. You're going to generously stick around for a couple extra questions. Big shout out to our Patreon members. Dan's going to get the car question and all the other good stuff. So if you're not a Patreon member, please be sure to sign up and help support this kind of content. But Dan, final question. I've asked this of all the candidates, and I think I said this to Shalane Etchinson last week. I think it's really powerful, especially to have veterans, people who are known to be independent, who are known to be country first. But I'm going to give you the floor. 30 seconds, a minute, minute and a half, whatever you need. why should independents in America and why should independents in Nebraska support Dan Osborn?
Yeah, I just did an event with the disabled American veterans out in Fremont, Nebraska, and I met three Vietnam vets. Amazing people. The stories were intense, and a lot of people won't speak freely about their time there, but these guys did. But one of them told me, he's going to vote for me, and he was a Republican. He said, I always vote for vets. And I go, okay, well, why is that? And he said, well, when you sign up for the military, you're basically saying that you're willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice for your country, and that's how much you love your country. So if you're willing to do that, then being in continue that service as a representative of all the people. It goes kind of got caught up there, but yeah, it goes to it speaks to who I am and how much I love this country. And what you're going to get from me is I'm not going to take a dime of corporate PAC money, because I believe that's the problem in this with the corruption in DC. And you're going to get somebody who's going to work for the people, because they're going to be my boss, and at the end of the day, I'm accountable to them.
Excellent. Well, I'm really thankful that you've joined us on the show to introduce yourself. I hope you'll come back and we can keep track here. I mean, you've got a lot of support that's growing around the country. I hope this helps put you on more people's map. But most of all, I just want to thank you thank me for my service. I think this is this is like volunteering again. And enlisting in this fight is really important, especially in these early days where you are often alone, you're often outmatched, you're often outgunned. You're still, doing a really important job back in your community, and you're a great role model. And I think that's really important here. You're talking about your family, you're talking about your values, and you're somebody that we can all look up to and root for, Dan. So I wish you the best. And we'll be rooting for you, and stay vigilant, my friend.
Thank you so much, Paul.